Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Bernstein, and I'm the president here at the New York Botanical Garden, and what a pleasure it is to welcome all of you to Ross Hall and to today's symposium, A Seat at the Table. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We are situated at the New York Botanical Garden, which is located in the ancestral homeland of the Lenape, Delaware people. We honor them and acknowledge their displacement, dispossession, and continued presence. As you entered the gallery this morning, I hope you were able to learn a little bit about the garden's oral history project that collects individual stories from Bronx community gardens and gardeners. You may have also noticed the poster highlighting our mural project that honors some of those gardeners and gardens. Bronx artist Andre Trenier just finished the first mural in the series. It's right up the street from us on Southern Boulevard and East 182nd. The mural celebrates the Garden of Happiness and its co-founder, activist, community garden pioneer, and NYBG trustee, Karen Washington, who is moderating today's panel discussion. Yes, round of applause for Karen. Always a round of applause for Karen. After the symposium, I hope you'll have some time to head over to the Edible Academy and visit the beautiful new African American garden, which ties together plants, history, and culture. That garden, along with the Oral History Project, the murals, and this symposium, are all part of a larger garden initiative, Food Humanities in the Local Community, which is generously supported by the Mellon Foundation. As you can tell from your program, today's symposium exploring Black farmers brings together an amazing group who come to the topic from many different perspectives, experiences, and parts of the country. I want to thank Karen Washington, Dr. Gail Myers, Matthew Rayford, and Kadisha Williams for participating in Stories from the Farm, which is going to be a fascinating panel. And in today's first session, we have two extraordinary writers and thinkers, Dr. Jessica B. Harris and Natalie Bazile. This is the fifth food dialogue we've presented with Dr. Harris, but it is the first one that we've been able to present live and in person here at the garden. Doesn't that feel wonderful? Yeah. It's also wonderful that both Jessica and Natalie are continuing to reach wider audiences beyond the printed page. Queen Sugar, adapted from Natalie's powerful novel, will have its 7th season on Oprah's own network. Yes. And Netflix just announced a 2nd season of High on the Hog based on Jessica's fascinating book. Yes. The series also just won the Peabody, by the way, so we're very happy for Jessica, also an NYBG trustee. Yes. Today, we're going to be hearing how, in many ways, Black farming is as much about culture as it is about horticulture. And to underscore that, we're delighted that poets Ross Gay and Latasha Nevada Diggs are here with us today, yes, to share their words and bring their unique perspectives. So, to get things underway, please join me in welcoming Latasha Diggs.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Bom dia.
Bom dia.
Tudo bem? Oh boy. Thank you so much, Botanical Gardens, for having me. And thank you, Dr. Jessica Harris, for the plug. Truly, truly honored to be here. Before I begin to read, I'd like to say that the poem was originally commissioned by the Africa Center and MoFad Museum of Food and Drink to honor and commemorate the wonderful exhibition that's going on right now, curated by Dr. Jessica Harris, but to also honor Dr. Harris's ongoing, continuing, epic, lifelong love for our food. So I'll start right there. I'll stop right there. And very quickly, for my elders, and in honor of my big brother, GT. Kalanka, Uyantla, Udeliga, Uganawa, Gala Latitla, Ela Titla, Ayeli, east, north, west, south, above, below, center. Stir freely on this land, make heirloom the pecan tree. Tell Miss Mabel, cousin Peanut, the scar of rice fields starts on 111th. Just me and my lunch bag, a whiting fillet wrapped in brown paper. What windward dish makes us kin? Our testimony is at the hearth. You wonder where we began, brine of oyster, warm ginger, fat of crackling. Eat, offer me your hand backside. Taste this gumbo on skin. I chop wild, the Bay Area mustards, Wadesboro style. Serve shivering sweet tea. Tell inside Wall Street taverns of low country tomato and shoreline harvest, you are here. Where a grain is spaghetti, eating while black skillets tried and true, where fungi is absent, shook and nettle these ripped turnips, the tender fish cheeks you collect from La Maqueta, delicacies they don't know. And yes, gizzards are a sin to let go from a Dayton, Ohio kitchen, French fries. What is rice without our labor? From Benin with love, a yam is not a yam. You say a pot, I say a mess. A pickle, peppermint, I, daughter of PD in Harlem, what Geechee call a boil, sopped up broth, will, season, lips, raw, make an entire block, a massacre of sucked crab legs. Tell this earth of pepper pot and brittle thyme, the heat of French stew stoves, ways we do with throwaway. You now go. Study the good book. Read Where to Get Warm Peach Cobbler Before Sundown. What Make Flavor Stay in Chi-Town Pork Chops. A slow earth roast. Break cold in bones, you kindred to Thomas Downey and Pigfoot Mary. Dried shrimp, ginger, let it do. The Bajan rice, the red rice, the pigeon pea, the cow pea. Please make from black-eyed jewels eggplant across big pans karage. Bake the cake vermelho, like the clay and bottom crackle. It don't get any better than gong gong. Seeds of Carolina flavor will win wives and men. Red beans mean cuckoo, broken rice, jollof comfort. Stay here with me in Porto Novo, or Dofusky, or Gonvier, or Grenada. Stay thick in this meager roux of okra, smothered liver, then walk tall. The mullet so misses cornmeal, Beside simple pots, there's a lyric all its own for gravy. Careful not to slice your celestial collards too thin for New Year's Day. Don't let that grease pop at your knuckles. Grandfathers say, put your foot in it. Thank you.
Good morning. And it is morning, God help us all. It's like, hardest thing I've had to do this month, get up. Okay. I'm going to let Natalie introduce herself in a minute, but I'm going to start by lobbing something over the net that I am sure nobody expected to hear this morning, which is something from, pause, Gone with the Wind. Gasp. But there's one important thing in it. There is a scene in which Gerald O'Hara, Scarlett's daddy, picks up Earth and he says, "Do you mean to tell me, Katie Scarlett O'Hara, that land doesn't mean anything to you? Why, land is the only thing in the world worth working for, worth fighting for, worth dying for, because it's the only thing that lasts." Who knew there'd be wisdom in Gone with the Wind? But now we're going to talk about land, Katie Scarlett. We're going to talk about land and farmers, and specifically and particularly Black farmers. And there is no one better with whom to have the beginnings of this dialogue than Natalie Bazile. So Natalie, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. Tell us what you want us to know about you.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start by saying that I am a daughter of the South. My father grew up in Louisiana. My mother's people are from Georgiana, Alabama, and I'm a product of the Great Migration. And I'm a native Californian who absolutely feels this connection to land and the story of land. I feel like it's in my DNA. And that is what has led me to write these stories, both in fiction and in nonfiction, about Black people and our connection to the land, and to do everything I can to honor Black farmers.
Absolutely. Well, most people in the audience know you from Queen Sugar, and as Jennifer Bernstein told us, it's premiered actually in 2016 and is still going strong for its 7th season. So
Yes.
There are a lot of stories, a lot of stories with the land, a lot of stories connected to and from the land. But let's start by maybe hearing a passage or two from Queen Sugar.
Sure. So I thought I would share a scene from fairly early in the novel. And for those of you who are more familiar with the series, you will still recognize this chapter. This is a moment when Charlie has been on the farm for a few weeks now, and she has begged Prosper Denton to be her mentor, and she's pulling things together. And this is just a very short excerpt, so you can get a sense of the book if you are more familiar with the show. 10 straight days of clearing the morning glories and tearing out Johnson grass. 10 straight days of dirt and dust and sweat from places Charlie never knew she could sweat. 10 straight days of rumbling up and down the rows, up and down, up and down, up and down, while the sun blazed overhead and heat rose from below. And finally, Charlie's second quadrant, and then the rest of her farm was neat as a pinstripe suit. The cane was still stunted, much to her dismay, and in some places looked worse than it had before, but Denton assured her that now that the rows were clear, it had a chance to grow properly. "What's next?" Charlie asked as they rode to the hardware store late one afternoon. An order of wrenches had come in. "Time to run your drains," Denton said. "All that dirt we cleared between the rows has piled up on the ends. We have to clear it out or your fields won't drain right, and the last thing you want is for water to get hung up out there. Cane likes to be damp, but it hates to be flooded." He turned left at the junction and rolled down his window. "The good news is, most of your land is in perfect condition, is the perfect combination of sand and loam. It drains well. Go over it with a piece of equipment you can hardly see where you've passed. It's blackjack land, all boggy and filled with clay that'll hold the water and tear up your machines." Who knew laying by was so involved?" Charlie said. Denton nodded. "It's critical. You're giving that cane your final amen. You're saying, that's it. I've done all I can. Everything goes like it should. The last time you're in your field, this will be the last time you're in your fields till grinding. After laying by, you stand back and let Mother Nature do her work." From the passenger seat, Charlie looked at Denton and for the 100th time was overcome with relief and gratitude. It wasn't simply the knowledge that she couldn't have done this without him. No, that wasn't simply it. It was the feeling she got in his presence, a sense of a quiet calm, as though she were standing in the shadow of an old redwood. They didn't make them like Denton anymore. She couldn't have asked for a better mentor. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Well, when I first got into conversation with Natalie, and we didn't know each other until this panel was really going to happen. We knew of each other,
Yes.
but we hadn't connected. We started talking about Southern Louisiana. I don't have Southern Louisiana roots, but I have very vibrant Southern Louisiana connections. I spent part of the year in New Orleans. And we were talking about place and atmosphere and haunting, and particularly sugarcane. So talk about what certainly in Southern Louisiana is not just queen sugar, but empress sugar.
Definitely.
So tell us a little bit about you and sugar.
Sure. So when I started writing Queen Sugar many years ago, in the very first iterations of that book, I didn't know that sugarcane grew in Louisiana.
Okay.
And on one of my visits, I was with a friend who took me to land and I was looking for a crop for Charlie to inherit. And a friend of mine who grew up in Louisiana but had moved to San Francisco invited me down for her birthday party. And I was telling her that I had no crop for Charlie to inherit. And she said, well, my mother owns some sugarcane land. And she took me out into the middle of this crop. And Jessica, it was like the sky opened up. And I stood in the middle of this sugarcane field, and it was the middle of July, and that cane was 10 feet tall, and it was rustling in the breeze. And the little that I knew at that time about sugar was that it was one of the main crops that built this country.
Wow.
And that it had roots that extended all the way to the Caribbean, and that people had fought over sugar and died over sugar. And I just had the sense that this was the crop that Charlie needed to inherit, because it would allow me to talk about all of these other elements. And it was really from that day forward, that was July 15th, 2005.
Okay.
And since then, until the book came out, I became a real student of South Louisiana, where I had family, but from a different region. And I really devoted myself to learning everything about sugar and sugarcane and its history.
Sugarcane has an extraordinary
Yes, it
history.
does.
I wrote a book on rum.
Yes.
Surprise, surprise. But in order to write anything about rum, you have to know about sugarcane.
Absolutely.
And so the thing that was fascinating to me about sugarcane is it was actually sugar. Okay, a little bit of Jessica, the food historian. Sugar actually grows wild, and so it probably originates in New Guinea. It moves slowly into the Indian subcontinent. And in the Indian subcontinent, it kind of takes root and it becomes one of the very first plants that moves man toward technology, creating the grinding mills to grind the sugar to get the juice from the cane. Alexander the Great sees sugar cane in India and calls it honey, well, he sees the sugar, honey from a reed. Because if you look at sugarcane growing, you can see it looks very much like a reed. Sugarcane gradually makes its way to the Mediterranean, hits the Eastern Mediterranean around 700 AD, takes another 700 years to get to this hemisphere. Sugarcane arrives in this hemisphere where it does not grow normally in 1493 with Columbus on his second voyage. His mother-in-law apparently had a cane plantation in the Canary Islands. It then, it transforms the hemisphere. They grew it in the Caribbean initially, but it didn't really prosper. But they did note that it grew so well that they had a rich crop. It goes down to Brazil, and it is in Brazil that they perfect the plantation system. And the plantation system and the perfection of that then, by about 1660s, mid-17th century, transforms the Caribbean. First in Barbados, and then it begins an upward move through the islands. And there, that's what happens when you talk to a school teacher. She lectures, I'm sorry. Okay, but it transforms the islands because it is the thing that brings enslavement. Working the sugarcane, and working sugarcane out of all of those crops and more that you can see in the African American garden. Sugar was the most brutal.
Definitely.
Cotton was bad. Indigo wasn't pretty. Tobacco wasn't fun. But sugarcane was quite simply brutal in ways the others are not. And so that rise of sugarcane goes up. Haiti, the pearl of the Antilles, all about sugarcane. Jamaica, all about sugarcane. And ultimately up to and into Louisiana, which is, strangely enough, the end of sugarcane. It's, if you will, the decadence of sugarcane. It comes much later into Louisiana. It arrives in Louisiana in the early part of the 19th century. And there it transforms that as well. But the thing about sugar, and there is sugar growing in the African American garden, is you can watch, almost see it grow. It grows so rapidly. It is just, it grows like, dang, I was just here yesterday and it was there and now it's there. It is an amazing plant. And so it forms that place.
Absolutely.
So talk about that place.
Yeah. Well, when you are in South Louisiana, really from Lafayette all the way to New Orleans, that whole region is the sugarcane belt. And it is an amazing crop visually, which appealed to me. It has this rich history. It is brutal. And so it's a very complicated experience. And that's why I really wanted that to be the crop that Charlie struggled with, because I wanted to be able to pull in all of that history. And I wanted to also be able to say to readers and then ultimately viewers, you know, Black people have been involved with this crop in this place for generations. And it was my way of really honoring all of the people who have toiled generation after generation after generation with this crop that built this country.
That built this country.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
No. And it's what an honoring. What a wonderful way of honoring. You have another passage that you're going to read for us.
I do. It is from this book, We Are Each Other's Harvest. And what I wanted to do after I finished with Queen Sugar and that book was off in the world, I was approached by a wonderful editor, Tracy Sherrod at Amistad. And she invited me to do a nonfiction book. And when I thought about it, and she said, well, you can do anything you'd like. And when I thought about this, I thought, Queen Sugar was my way of investigating the story of Black farmers, but through the lens of fiction. But I also wanted to give Black farmers a chance to speak for themselves. And I wanted to celebrate and amplify their voices any way that I could through the lens of nonfiction this time. And so We Are Each Other's Harvest is my attempt to really tell the story of land, and I know we'll get into that. But I want to share just a few paragraphs from the foreword from We Are Each Other's Harvest to give you a sense of kind of what I was thinking about with this new book. So, so this is a foreword that I wrote. And for those of you who don't know, I live in San Francisco. So I'm a little bit removed from Louisiana and all that. But this was on my mind. Okay. Drive east on Interstate 80 from San Francisco towards Sacramento, past vast acres of alfalfa, watermelon, and rice, and you'll eventually come to a 20-story mural of a solitary figure squinting across the land. Dressed in a plaid shirt, jeans, and work boots, a tuft of gray hair peeking out from a baseball cap, the figure kneels in a patch of sunflowers. With one hand, the figure cradles a husky yellow Labrador. The other hand points out to the horizon. The figure is a farmer. He is a middle-aged man, and he's white. The artist who painted the 20 by 20-foot mural titled Stewards of the Soil says she meant to pay tribute to the farmers in her community. I don't fault her for wanting to honor them. Farming is difficult work, and I acknowledge that her mural reflects the picture most people have in mind when they envision the American farmer. And yet, every time I drive past it, I can't help but think it only tells part of the story. Surely, somewhere across the thousands of acres, there must be a handful of Black and brown farmers. Who are they? What stories might they tell if given a chance? And that's really the way I start this new book. And it's asking this question that really plagued me, because one of the things I noticed, even when working on Queen Sugar, I spent 6 years going down to Louisiana, trying to learn about sugarcane. But every time I would go, I would look around and I would say, but where are all the Black farmers? Where are they? And in those 6 years, 6 of the 13 years it took to write Queen Sugar, I met a total of 5 Black farmers. That was it in all of South Louisiana. And that was distressing to me. And so in Queen Sugar and now in this new book, I really am trying to say, let's look at the Black farmers who remain, let's tell their stories, let's amplify their voices.
And you do it so beautifully.
Thank you.
You do it so beautifully. The title of the new book, in case you're not familiar with it, is We Are Each Other's Harvest, celebrating African American farmers, land, and legacy. And I think the whole idea of land and legacy is important. It's self-evident what first captivated you about Black farmers, but I want to ask, what is your first memory of a Black farm?
My very first memory is of first of all, my own great-great-grandfather, Mac Hall, who was born in 1845, after emancipation, was a farmer. And he amassed ultimately about 600 acres of land in Georgiana, Alabama. But my first conscious memory is of the 400 farmers, maybe more, who descended on Washington, D.C. with Pickford versus Glickman. And I remember seeing those farmers on television and thinking, what is this all about, you know? And that was at that first critical moment.
Right, well, explain the...
Yes, so Timothy Pickford was a farmer in North Carolina who was the named plaintiff in this class action lawsuit where he and a bunch of farmers got together and sued the US government for the discriminatory practices that had been deployed on behalf of the USDA, an agency that is designed and was established to help the American farmer. But this same agency, for generations, systematically deployed these strategies to disenfranchise Black farmers. And this is one of the two main reasons why in this country, the number of Black farmers has dwindled from almost 1 million in 1920. There were 925,000 Black farmers in the 20s. And by 2017, there were only 45,000. Yes, so Pickford was the first farmer in this class action lawsuit that sued the US government and won this case in the late 1980s, early 1990s, where the government had to admit that for generations they had been seizing Black farmers' land. And I mean, just a whole constellation of dastardly practices that had really robbed Black people of this legacy that we had brought forward since emancipation of land ownership and farming.
Well, and even that, I mean, the whole agricultural thing about, you know, one of the things that we forget is that the early agricultural workers,
Yes,
enslaved,
yes.
early agricultural workers, who's working the land. And that's not just a United States thing. That is a hemispheric thing. And so I think we tend to think in terms of the United States, but everybody needs to kind of take a step back and think it's not just here. It is the hemisphere. And so that whole idea of the primordialness, if you will, of the Black farmer,
Yes.
immediately following the Native American farmer, that's it. We were the first farmers. And so when we talk about that, farming, when we talk about Black farming today, how do you define that? What makes a Black farmer?
Oh boy. I think anyone who has a connection to the soil, you know, has a connection to land. It could be a small gardener. It could be a farmer who has, you know, a few hundred acres. I think it's anybody who feels that connection to the soil and who feels that, understands what it means to grow something. You know, I mean, it's a loose definition in my opinion, because I've met so many farmers, so many people who have that, you know, in urban settings, in rural settings. I don't think it matters. I think it's a larger community of people who have that connection to the earth.
And I would like to ask, because I know that for years I was thinking Black farmers, and I think food.
Right, yes.
And then just recently, I was at a bookstore and saw a book entitled Black Flora, Black Flower Farmers.
Yes, yes.
So we don't even think about that.
Or cattle.
Or cattle,
farmers,
cattle
ranchers.
farmers, ranchers.
Yes,
So what we're talking about here is something beyond just that kind of farming, the narrow farming,
Yes.
the thing that has unfortunately in this country become agribusiness. One of the things that I like to say is with Black farmers, we are trying to get out of agribusiness
Yes.
and get back to agriculture.
yes.
And so to look at that divide and how we get into the agriculture. And there's going to be so much more about that in our next panel, which is called Stories from the Farm, and is going to speak with some farmers of varying degrees of land ownership, for
Yes,
want of a better
stewardship,
word,
yes.
and stewardship. So are we talking just sustenance? And do we include the flowers in that sustenance?
so,
So
yes,
it's a wider
absolutely.
definition,
It's
it's
a
a
much wider
broader
definition.
definition. Getting back to the book, and specifically to writing the book, We Are Each Other's Harvest is almost like a scrapbook. Those of you who have the book can see that it is a very carefully curated compendium, for want of a better word, of different aspects of Black farming, ranging from poetry to essays to photographs to conversations. How did you choose what to include?
Well, you know, it was interesting. When I started this project, really, I'm not a historian. I am a storyteller. And I really wanted, as I thought about the way I feel about this topic, Black people's connection to the land, Black and brown people's connection to the land, and that whole rich history, I have an emotional reaction to that. And so in writing this book, I really thought, and I would hear myself in the early days telling people, you know, I think this book needs to have photographs in it. And I think it needs to have poetry. And one of the poems that I was so honored to include among the many is Ross Gay's poem that he read last night at the opening. And I love poetry. I'm not a poet, but I have a huge admiration for poets. And so I wanted to include poetry and photographs and essays and first-person narratives with farmers who could tell their own stories so that you can hear their voices. And I wanted this book to be celebratory and uplifting, and I wanted it to be a dynamic reading experience so that you could open up the book to any chapter and have kind of enter this world from a different door. And so the book is really, it is a scrapbook. It is kind of my love letter to farmers and farming and agriculture. And so it includes all of these different elements. So there, and one of the things when I was traveling around interviewing farmers, I had a photographer with me, and she took the most beautiful portraits of them. And so between the photographs and the essays and the poems and the sayings and all of this, I hope that the reader feels what I feel.
Oh, I think absolutely.
I hope
I think
so.
absolutely. And those of you who have not seen the book, it's outside, so go buy it. But the thing that is so amazing about it is the perfect bedside book,
Yeah.
because you can pick it up anywhere and read a little bit and put it down until the next night. But the other thing is that when you close your eyes after reading it, it's not the harrowing 11 o'clock news that's going
Right,
to keep you
right,
up at night. It is something that soothes you.
Yes. I wanted it to be that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that I know about you is that you are a former English major.
Yes, that is true.
And I'm wondering how much that may have influenced the way that you came up to the book. And
Well, I wanted this to be, as I said, celebratory and uplifting and as beautiful as I could make it. So it was important to have elements in it that were really an embrace. And I wanted beauty to be part of this story because that's what I feel when I am talking to these farmers. You know, I wanted it to be emotional. And I want to say something about the cover also. The cover, and have a copy here, it includes the two, Leah and Naima Pennyman of Soul Fire Farm. And they were the very first farmers who I visited, and I had an opportunity to spend a day up there and was so just inspired by the work that they're doing. And when I was working with my editor on the cover, it really came down to two. It came down to this beautiful archival photograph of a young Black man taken in the 1920s, and he's kind of standing on this platform and being pulled along by this mule. And that photograph is in the book. But I wanted a cover that spoke to today.
mm-hmm. Yes.
And I wanted a cover that was looking forward to the future. And I wanted a cover that a reader picking up this book or considering this book, I wanted a cover that was impossible for the reader to say, I know that story, right? I know that story. Because there's so much out there that is still evolving, right? And that's why I just love the Penniman sisters being on this cover because they and so many other people are looking forward to what is possible.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And it's a dynamic cover. It's almost in motion. Turn it around again so people can see.
They are fierce.
They are fierce.
They are just badass women.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, it's like, don't mess with us.
Don't mess with us. Fierce, apologetic.
Unapologetic about it all.
And like so many of the farmers who I met, many are on this next panel.
Mm-hmm.
The vision, the determination, the resilience, the wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
This is what, I just get so animated and excited about it because this is what is so exciting to me.
Right.
Is what is ahead. You know,
Mm-hmm.
looking back, yes, but also moving forward.
Mm-hmm. So almost like Sankofa, looking back so you can look
Absolutely.
forward.
Absolutely.
Looking
yes.
back to see where you've been so you know where you're headed and you can focus and move toward where you're
Yes.
headed. I'm going to go back to pick up on something you said earlier today, and I'm going to reference my cousin who is up there somewhere. Like you, I am a child of the Great Migration. And I want to ask you about the gardens of your youth. Did you grow up in San Francisco?
I grew up in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Yes.
Were there gardens connected to your family
Yeah.
there?
So my mother, on my mother's side, my mother is an avid gardener. And on my mother's side, she's a descendant from Mac Hall, the gentleman I spoke of earlier. And on my mother's side of the family, there was always this belief that land, gardening, it all came together. And my mother was an avid gardener, and she really passed that love of growing things on to me. And so when we lived in Los Angeles, we lived in a place where there was some city land kind of on the side of our house that I kind of borrowed for a garden. And I would get out there, and at the time, my two daughters were little. And we had all of, we grew everything because it was Southern California, and you could grow everything. And we had this beautiful garden out there. And my dad, who is from Louisiana, loved to come over in the evenings after work. He only lived about 3 blocks away. And he would come over in the evening, but the thing he would do every time, he would take off his shoes and he would walk barefoot in the dirt. And for the longest time, I really could not understand what that was all about. And he used to say that it reminded him of his Louisiana childhood. And really, it was when I started to work on Queen Sugar that all of a sudden I got it.
Taking your shoes off now?
That taking the shoes off, but it was the physical connection.
Absolutely.
It was his memory of being a young boy in South Louisiana. It was that physical connection to the earth and to the land. And so I really got it from both sides. I got the gardening and the love of growing things from my mother's side, but then I got this deeper, almost cellular experience of being physically connected to the land from my dad. And I just am so grateful for that because I carry that with me. And in San Francisco, it's, it's windy and it's foggy and it's cold and, I grow lemons and greens, but that's about all I.
But you grow.
I do grow.
There you go.
Yes, I do grow.
There you
yes.
go. Yeah, no. My connection is I'm old enough so that there were what were called victory gardens.
Yes.
And my grandmother lived in the South Jamaica projects in Queens and had one. So I remember being in the garden with her. And I must have been very small because I remember looking up and the Long Island Railroad was that look, not that look. So I think we all have that connection. I'm thinking I'm getting a signal that says we are pretty much at time, and we've got some questions coming, but I want to end with one thing. We started with Gone with the Wind. You were an English major, I was a French major, but as I was listening and thinking about all of this, Voltaire ends his book Candide with, Il faut cultiver son jardin, meaning you must cultivate your garden. You certainly cultivate yours. Thank you so very much. Oh goodness, we've got lots of questions. So, the first question is, what is the best vegetable you've eaten recently?
The best vegetable I have eaten recently was on Matthew Rayford's farm. He made okra that he grilled, and Matthew, what did you do? It was like marinated in beer. It was mind-blowingly delicious.
You know, okra's my vegetable totem, so I'm on it. Yeah, that sounds good.
It was like slap your mama, amazing, amazing. So that, and I think about, that was in February, and I still think about that okra.
Question, how can Black chefs best support Black farmers? Is the restaurant industry worth saving, or is there a better way forward when it comes to the system we rely on to feed ourselves? Long question.
That's a long question.
And
you might have a better answer for that.
I don't know that I do. I think that's almost another symposium. So I think we might have to move that one on, and the next one may equally be another symposium. Could you please discuss the role of enslavement and indigenous people, American Indians, in the Caribbean? And that is, again,
that's a big
that's another
big topic.
Symposium.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, though. That one
Yeah.
may be coming.
Yeah.
There are discussions about the African American garden and what may happen to it if it morphs. Are you inspired by poetry?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the title of this book, We Are Each Other's Harvest, is from a Gwendolyn Brooks poem. It's called Paul Robeson, and the last stanza of that poem, it was very interesting. When I was trying to think of a title for this new book, I had the whole manuscript laid out on this card table and all the different chapters. And I was trying to think of a title that would capture everything that I was trying to say in this book. And one of the little passages that I have all these different little elements of the book, and one of them are like excerpts from like Chief Seattle, who talks about, we're all part of the earth. And I happened to look down on this day, and I had printed out this last stanza of this Gwendolyn Brooks poem, and it says, "We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond." And when I saw that, for whatever reason, I saw it in a particular way on this day, and I thought, that's the title. Because to me, it spoke to so much of what we are trying to do, right? It's about, we are here to take care of each other. We are here to move forward together. We draw strength and inspiration and support from each other. And so we are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. And it just kind of summed it up. So again, in my next life, I just want to come back as a Black poet, because I'm telling you,
You already are.
They have it. They know what to do. So yes, I'm tremendously inspired.
You've got it there. I've got two last questions, and I think we may have time for them. Yes? Only two. I think there are three questions here that I'm going to pass on to Karen Washington, because they are
That'd be
probably
great.
more apt for her panel.
Yeah.
But this is specifically, what about the sugar crop made it so brutal?
Well, it was a brutal crop. Everything about sugar is brutal. It is brutal to plant, and I have planted sugarcane in August
Ooh.
in Louisiana.
Oh, Lord.
Whew. But it is also brutal to harvest, because, imagine all you have is a cane knife.
Well, and a cane knife, which is
A machete.
a machete, but which is also extraordinarily sharp,
Yes, yes. And then the blades of the sugar
which
cane.
are like razor blades.
It's like razors. And so you were out there with this machete, and you have to cut that cane,
And not yourself.
and not yourself. At the bottom, you're getting sliced up by
the
leaves.
sugar cane leaves.
You're out there in the heat.
And sugarcane seems to draw rats and snakes.
Rats and snakes, yes.
So you are in those fields where actually, if the cane is high enough, once you're in the cane, you can't see
You can't
the sky.
see anything. Yeah.
And that's just the growing of it. The processing of it. You could lose an arm in the rollers.
Yes.
They are ladling hot sugar. If you've ever
Yes.
worked with hot sugar in a kitchen, it's like napalm.
Yeah.
The burns you could get.
You're
And you're
boiling it in
boiling
these
it
big
in these
kettles.
huge boiling pots.
Yes.
It's unpleasant to the maximum. Let's just leave it
Yes.
at that. And this is the last question we're going to have, because I know the answer. Who was the Black female chef in the early 70s that would close her show on PBS saying, "Come yamma, come yam"? That would be the late Verda Mae Smart Grosvenor.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you.
Who made an appearance with us today. So yay for Verda Mae. Thank you all very much.
Yes, thank
We
you.
are now moving on. We have a quick 10-minute break. Those of you who don't need to stretch right now are in for a treat, because you'll be able to watch a brief trailer of Rhythms of the Land, the upcoming film from Dr. Gail P. Myers. And those of you who do have to leave quickly and come back quickly, because Ross Gay will be opening up the next section with a poetry reading. Thank you so very much.
That's open. Next is purple peas. Next is butter beans. Next is purple peas. And next is snap peas. See that worm? If that worm wasn't in there, it wouldn't be gone. And I call it organic. No chemical. As you see, the dirt is hard. We are the Georgia red clay. So if we spread this mulch down, you see it turning black under there. It breaks down and make good soil.
I'm just following the contour of the land, the area curve, so I curve with the seed when I plant.
Tomatoes and corn and peanuts and sweet potatoes.
And girl, you cook a slice of ham, you can smell it a mile. I'm the one that can go out there and snap the okra early in the morning, take it to the market, be back before it gets real hot.
We had a cabbage so big, wouldn't fit in the biggest tub that they made.
So I was just rough as them boys. Rode the horses, mules, or whatever.
My parents had grown up in Tipton County on a farm, and my mother's parents and so forth owned the farm, and her grandparents and so forth.
How you doing? My name is Thomas Rock Jr. I'm a fourth generation farmer on Cane River, Louisiana.
For me personally, I did whatever my grandmother did.
You're 72 and you still working the garden.
98 and know it. And I got a shape to show it. I didn't have to put that in it.
Where we lived, the white man owned all the land around where we were. And we heard it here up here. And Moro, it was all black. The community up here was all black.
Well, I grew up in the community surrounding our relatives, and we were all landowners.
About 50 acres when we started. Then we expanded from there. We went on up over 100 and some acres.
So at one time they had like 1,000 acres of land.
We started out with 80 acres and we grew all the way up to over 3,000 acres.
I guess it taught me how to love and keep on loving. This community was so knit, it was just knit tight, just like weed.
My initial thought was to go, and it's still a part of my vision, is to go to the communities and sell to the underserved communities.
You'll see a lot of kids around trying to make sure that they get a good start, on the right track, and understand the land. Land has so much power.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ross Gay, and I'm going to read a poem. But first, I just want to say how glad I am to be here, how lucky I feel to be with you all. I told Karen earlier that I have been kind of, I'm a writer, but I'm also a serious gardener, and I'm also deeply invested in questions about the land and have been writing sort of around the questions of the land. And so, the Black Farmers and Urban Gardeners Conference has been such a kind of important thing to me. And so many folks who I feel like have helped me think about my writing. I was just sitting there and I was thinking, my subject I have two subjects in my writing. One is my relationship to the land. Actually, it's one of my main subjects. And my other subject, which I had already articulated to myself, is joy. My subjects are joy and my relationship to the land. And I was sitting back there and I was thinking, they're the same thing. They're the same thing, yeah. Anyway, grateful to be here. This is a poem called Burial. And I like to ask this question before I read this poem. Has anyone ever done anything with their placenta? Shout it out. Okay, yeah. Okay. Planted a tree on it. Okay. Sometimes I ask that question and people look at me funny, but this is the crowd, the right crowd. Burial. You're right. The fertilizer's good. It wasn't a gang of dullards came up with chucking a fish in the planting hole, or some midwife got lucky with the placenta. I'll plant a tree here. And a sudden flush of quince and jam enough for months. Yes, The magic dust our bodies become casts spells on the roots about which someone else could tell you the chemical properties, but it's just magic to me. Which is why a couple springs ago, when first putting in my 2 bare root plum trees out back, I took the jar which has become my father's house, and lonely for him and hoping to coax him back from my mother as much as me, I poured some of him into the planting holes, and he dove in, glad for the robust air, saddling a slight gust into my nose and mouth, chuckling as I coughed, but mostly he disappeared into the minor yawns in the earth, into which I placed the trees, splaying wide their roots, casting the gray dust of my old man evenly throughout the hole, replacing then the clods of dense Indiana soil until the roots and my father were buried, watering it all in with one hand while holding the tree with the other straight as the flag to the nation of simple joy of which my father is now a naturalized citizen. Waving the flag from his subterranean lair, the roots curled around him like shawls or jungle gyms, like hookahs or the arms of ancestors, before breaststroking into the xylem, riding the elevator up through the cambium and into the leaves where, when you put your ear close enough, you can hear him whisper, "Good morning." Where, if you close your eyes and push your face, you can feel his stubbly jowls. And good Lord, this year he was giddy at the first real fruit set and nestled into the 30 or 40 plums in the 2 trees, peering out from the sweet meat with his hands pressed against the purple skin like cathedral glass. And imagine his joy as the sun wizarded forth those abundant sugars and I plodded barefoot and prayerful at the first ripe plums swell and blush, almost weepy, conjuring some surely ponderous verse to convey this bottomless grace. You know, oh Father kind of stuff. Hundreds of hot air balloons filling the sky in my chest, replacing his intubated body, listing like a boat keel side up, replacing the steady stream of water from the one eye, which his brother wiped before removing the tube, keeping his hand on the forehead until the last wind in his body wandered off, while my brother wailed like an animal. And my mother said, weeping, "It's okay. It's okay. You can go, honey." At all of which my father guffawed by kicking from the first bite buckets of juice down my chin, staining one of my 2 button-down shirts, the salmon-colored silk one, hollering, "There's more of that!" Almost dancing now in the plum, in the tree, the way he did as a person, bent over and biting his lip and chucking the one hip out and then the other with his elbows cocked and fists loosely made and eyes closed and mouth made trumpet when he knew he could make you happy just by being a little silly and sweet. Thank you very much.
So let's give a big up applause again for Ross Gay for So, you know, first of all, I want people to just look at this picture up here because this is rare to see. No. Stop looking behind yourself. I'm talking on a panel. Even though that's his farm, so that's Matthew's farm in the background. But I want people to look at this panel because this is rare to see Black farmers on a panel about to begin to tell our story and talk about our story. So just take a picture and enjoy. So my name is Karen Washington. I tell people I'm a farmer. I grow food. I feed people body, mind, and spirit. And it gives me the pleasure to bring my family into this conversation. And we're gonna have a conversation around the food and the cuisine and the history and the work that we've all been doing. But first, when I begin something, I like to acknowledge and bring the ancestors that are in the room to be present and to allow me as a person to be able to speak, permission to speak about the things and sometimes the hard things that we're going to talk about. So without further ado, we're going to get into the conversation. I know Gail, for a long time, we've been in the trenches of doing a lot of work. She is a cultural anthropologist, a filmmaker, a farmer. So welcome, Gail, to the stage. Dr. Gail Myers to the stage. So I know Matthew because Matthew and I did this program called CASFIS, the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food System in Santa Cruz. He is a chef, an author, a farmer, a historian. So again, welcome Matthew to the panel as well. And what can I say about Khadija? We go way, way back, maybe 15, 20 years. She is a gardener, she's a farmer, she's an educator. Again, welcome Khadija to the stage. And so I'm going to start it with the first question, and I wrote things down, but I got to use my head now. Why farming? I'm just told to, why farming? Because as you know, there's been such a stain in history about farming. Why do you farm? So maybe Gail will start here and we'll go around. Gail, why are you farming?
Okay, well, I got into farming a little different than my other panelists. I was a scholar. I'm studying my PhD at Ohio State University, and had a conversation in 1997 with my advisor about farmers. He was working with Amish farmers. And the topic of black farmers came up. And it was the beginning of the Pickford versus Glickman litigation, which Natalie Brazil talked about. And I was curious. I was the same kind of questioning, what's really happening? And so as I began to learn more about black farmers, I was, again, just wanting to sort of piece this story together. But then I had an interview with an 89-year-old black farmer named William Chambers. Changed my whole trajectory because I went to the Ohio State, cultural anthropologist. I was supposed to go to Ecuador. So this foray into what black farming was sort of an aside. It wasn't going to be my dissertation topic. But then I started interviewing more farmers. And I realized that it gave me a certain connection to ancestors that I needed. And so that was the beginning. I began to interview more farmers, eventually 5 years later writing a dissertation on their sustainable farming practices. And in the course of all of that research, I began to understand how much love farmers have. I said, this is about love of the land, love of family. And eventually I became a gardener 8 years later, started growing and have been growing ever since. And so it's important for me because it connects me to the land and my ancestors and a healing that you don't get unless you really understand the land. I'll pass it on.
Wow, okay. So my story is a little interesting because I grew up on our family farm. Well, yeah, I kind of grew up on our family farm. Land's been in our family since 1874. I'm the 6th generation to be on it farming. My children are the 7th to have planted, harvested, and eaten from a crop off that land. And now, thank you. And now I have, we have a little cousin that's the 8th generation, and he planted strawberries 3 years ago when he was about 3 years old. And we didn't touch that strawberry patch. We just took it out this year. So 3 years, we just let it go, let it go, let it go. But I'm a child also of the 70s. So when I left the South, I was never, ever coming back. And I remember when my Nana duped us into saying that we can cultivate this land, because for years she'd been like, baby, what are we gonna do with all this land? And I used to say, well, y'all should go back to farming it, because that's what y'all know how to do. And then I was sitting down with my sister and I decided to go to a family reunion that we had not been to in the South for over 20 years, neither one of us. And we go to this and we sit down, and at that point, my sister had just retired out of the Navy, 20 years. I had done 10 years in the Army, and I had went to the Culinary Institute of America at this point and was the chef at the House of Representatives. So here we are sitting there, and my mom goes, you and your sister need to come over here and talk to us. And I was like, oh God, like we ain't been back home but like 15 minutes and we already getting ready to get this thing. So we go to the table and my Nana just looks at me and goes, so baby, what are we gonna do with all this land? And I'm thankful that you brought the ancestors in the room, because that's what happened to me. And Auntie Jessica, I think, did it yesterday, how you have a grandmother here and a grandmother here all whispering in your ear. I just looked over to my sister, and my sister went like this. She just kind of like, and I said, Nana, we should go back to farming. Hold up. They reach underneath the table and gift deed my sister and I the first 12 acres that we started on. Yes, and so that is kind of like our way back. But my sister and I also both suffer from PTSD and some other things because we both have done more than our duty for this country. And so we believe that the soil has now become therapeutic for what we do. And when you were talking about, barefoot in the soil, what Natalie was talking about, I have learned how to tell the moisture in the soil just by using my hand. And that comes from an ancestral thing of like trying to figure out, is the moisture in the soil by the root ball, or is it completely gone? And so a lot of times when you look at the first 2 inches of the soil is super dry. If you can get your hand down to this portion and pull up some of the soil and squeeze it and it holds together, you're at about 65% moisture. You do not need to water. We were conservationists before that was a word. Also, ain't nobody toting no pails all that far to plant and water them either. So we were just talking earlier in the car about you know how people talk about soaking peas right now? Well, also how I came to this was I also started to learn all these different things that were done when it came to farming. And the more I heard them, the more I was like, this is like, yeah, I know that. I remember that. And then I go, oh, it's inside my DNA. It's the ancestors always talking to me when I walk outside because I commune with them. I talk to the squirrels. None of them have names. I talk to the 41 species of birds that are on our farm also. And so it's all of that that I feel has drawn me back to the farm, to be back farming, after I swore I'd never, ever come back to the South.
So my entry into farming, which I realize is actually really important to me because there have been components of it that come from all of these different entry points. I grew up in urban agriculture in New York City. I was following Karen and other people like her because at the time it seemed like the right thing to do. It was very, I grew up in the urban ag movement, so there was a lot of politics and it was very activist heavy and there was food involved, food centered of course, but I felt like a lot of it was also gaining rights to the land and having the right to grow your own food, which is beautiful. And I realized how important it was for me to grow up not knowing any different. My family, we grew up really poor, and my parents grew up really poor. They're from South Carolina. They grew up growing their own food to eat. So when they migrated north, they inevitably decided to grow food in our yards and eventually started a community garden, Talkwa Community Farm in Highbridge, that I grew up in. So I didn't even know that everybody didn't grow their own food until I was in high school. And I was talking to my friends oh yeah, in the garden, we get tomatoes or whatever. And they're like, plants? And I'm like, yeah, you don't have a garden? And they're like, no, what? So then I bring my friends there and they're just like, wow. like, what the heck? This in the Bronx? This is wild. And I'm just like, oh, okay, that's cool. I didn't realize that more people didn't. I think I understood that not everyone grew food, but I didn't know that it wasn't like accessible. I didn't really understand that. And I think that was to a degree because my family insulated me from that and made sure that the work that we did was very community-centered. Everyone in our community ate. We had fish fries, we had events. The garden gates were open, they continue to be. The trees produce fruit, and people are invited in to come pick that fruit or eat those fruit and vegetables. But the question you asked was why farming, right? I think, especially now, because I'm in my rural farming journey, I'm upstate, I always want to say, like, I'm farming because it's the right thing to do and people deserve food and food should be available. And that's true. But I think ultimately I'm farming because it brings me joy. And to like grow and harvest food is really healing to me too. And I think you're both right in that walking barefoot in the soil, touching soil is really grounding, it's informative. It reminds us that it is in our DNA. And I mean, we can talk about the farming and slavery. That was brought up a couple times and on the previous talk as well. And I like to remind people that we have a rich history of farming before slavery, and that was part of the reason we were enslaved. So like, that's deeply rooted in us. Yeah. So yeah, I'm farming because it feels good.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about that because, you know, everyone always sort of brings the slavery aspect of farming, but it's much more than that. And so I want us to talk about the sort of the spiritual aspect of farming because we're so different than white farmers in terms of how we approach land and how we approach soil and how we approach our community. And so let's talk about the elements that we bring in, but also who is the person or what entity inspire you to do this work? We'll start with you, Matthew.
Oh, wow. I didn't expect to go first on that one. So let me say this. Matriarchally is what I know. I've always had women in our family. The reason we have the land is because the women kept meticulous records and they were fierce. The reason that I know how to butcher is my great-grandmother. The reason that I understand how important it is to keep the feminine energy on our property is because of the women in our family. So in our family, the men would do the tilling and the planting, and the women in our family did a lot of the harvesting and the conversation about when it was supposed to be picked or harvested. What was your question again? I'm sorry. I just had to bring that in because I think we don't talk enough about women farmers and why the men now are grounded. Like I'm grounded on my farm because of the women in my family. I talk about the men in my family, but I rarely talk about them within the realm of farming or even cooking. My dad's a baker by trade, but I always talk about my grandmother and my great-grandmother on both sides of the family. So I really believe that from that spiritual aspect that the women in my family, past and present, are the ones that have me being able to do what I do. And then the fact that for some reason, I've always been surrounded by amazing women that are doing this work that I've always been able to learn from. And I think that's the reason, and that's why I've been able to move forward. And I'll give you one of the things, and we were in the car talking about it, that I just learned a while back. So I was planting Sea Island red peas at one point, thought I had it dialed in, and I was following pea protocol, right? It needs some compost, it needs this, it needs that. And so I plant this, the bush is luscious. Do you hear me? Like a big bush. No flower, no fruit. So I end up on Sapelo Island with Corinne Bailey, and I happen to say, how do you plant this pea? Because I did all of the things that the book told me to do, that Caspers told me to do, all of this stuff. And she go, baby, it is the heel-toe method. And I was like, heel-toe method? What does that mean? So she reaches in her pocket, she takes some peas and she throws them in her mouth. And I was like, okay, what does that have to do with heels and toes? And she literally, for 50 feet, dragged the back of her heel to make a line. Just the back of her heel. She had on a little sandal. And I was looking and I was like, okay, that's the heel. What do you do with the toes? She takes the pea out of her mouth, drops it in the ground and takes her toes and cover it over. And I then learned how to plant that everything that's inside the pea already knows what it needs. It already has a conversation. She activated it with her mouth, and then Natalie, Gail, and Jessica just brought into me. It's because they wanted to commune with the pea so the pea knew who they were when they went out. What else I got to say?
Wait a second, let's have this conversation here. So Gail or Khadijah, do you wanna, what's spiritual about the work that you do? Who inspired you to do this work?
I worked with high school students for 10 years. I was terrified to work with them at first because I thought they'd eat me alive. But they were the kindest farmers, the sweetest farmers, and what they taught me throughout my experience with them is that the connection to nature is not different than who we are. Humans are inherently a part of that. And there is something kind of beautiful about watching young, jaded people all of a sudden be like, a carrot, a tomato, I did this. Or people who are like, I don't like veggies, but they're gonna eat the stuff that they grew because they grew it, and their friends better eat it too. And it like helped me understand that these are parts of us that we lose as we mold ourselves into capitalism and this system that encourages us to be individuals and compete with each other instead of communing with each other. So I learned just like from them that these are essential tools that and mechanisms they need to build community as they grow, and that understanding that connection to food at a young age, which I was really lucky to have because of the way that I was raised and the community I grew up in, changed my outlook on life. It filtered my outlook on life, and I enjoyed more things, I liked more things, I ate more things, and I continue to do so. And I remember I would take them to dinner in the summers because they work a summer job with me, and I'd be like, you ever had Indian food? You ever had Thai food? You ever been to Korean food? You ever been to this black restaurant or this, that? And they're just like, we've never left the Bronx, we don't know. So I'm like, you're going to restaurants, we're gonna go eat. And then they're eating and they're like, wow. And I'm like, yeah. Oh, I remember, okay, this is the last thing. I remember, I think in my second year of working with Active Citizen Project on Project Eats, we had an event for the youth that we worked with all season, and the food at the restaurant was grown by the youth. So they were like eating all this stuff and like, this is amazing. And I'm like, that's your kale. That's your stuff. And that was like a really like profound and beautiful moment for them and for me, because it made me realize like there's so many possibilities. And one of my youth are here. Raise your hand. She worked here. So like all that stuff is important. Like that is the thing that inspires me. It reminds me how important it is to experience and enjoy life and like carry that with me in the work that I do.
Her name is Carrie Lee Weems. She's my grandmother. I was born in Daytona Beach, And she grew up on Garden Street. Well, I grew up on Jefferson Street, and her house was one block on Garden Street. And as a 6, 7, and 8-year-old girl running around her garden and the chickens, and I remember she was an elder on that block. Her neighbors, all of her friends were elders, the one to the right, the one to the left. One had chickens and a plum tree, one had sugar cane. All of her friends grew food. And I took it for granted, as I said, and didn't think anything of it until I began my own garden. And that connection that I was looking for was my grandmother's ancestral connection. But then I started doing these interviews for this film that you all saw the trailer for. And I learned that my great-great-grandfather was a tenant farmer. See, I interviewed my aunt. She's the one in the film that says 98 and know it and got a shape to show it. Well, and she tells me how much my great-great-grandfather loved farming. She says he loved it. She didn't. But as I began to learn more and more about the farmers that I interviewed, I began to learn more and more about my own self and realizing that growing food was, just like everyone is saying, a part of my DNA. I didn't know that. And so now I do it as a continuation of this legacy. And I do it now because I just can't help but do it. I just, if I live in Florida now, and I don't have a garden, and it just feels so out of sorts. I do a lot of traveling, taking care of my mom. But growing food and being connected to that food story, like eating on the plate what I grow, is very empowering. And I feel like that's what my grandmother knew, the empowerment of that. And she was a very fierce and independent Black woman and grew her own food. And so that is what inspired, that and continues to inspire me. But as a young person, I just, it's there, was on the outside, but through apparently osmosis years later, I began to plant. A neighbor of mine came over and she saw me building up a little ridge. And she said, well, how'd you learn that? I was like, I don't know. So I feel like I was channeling my grandmother. It was there. And as soon as I began to plant my own food, I got a deeper connection with her and a deeper connection to myself. So it was my grandmother.
Sitting here and just listening, storytelling is so, so important. And I say that because we're at a critical point in agriculture where the average age of a farmer is now in his 60s. Black land loss is happening as we speak. We only own maybe 1% to 2% of all land here. Our wealth and our income is low as compared to other farmers. And so there are a lot of Black and brown little girls and boys that now want to farm. So what advice would you give that little Black and brown boy and girl that have their eyes wide open because they see you in the garden, they see you in the farm, and they want to grow? So what advice? So Gail, you got it. What advice? Look in someone's eyes out here, a youth, and give them some advice.
I would
It's
say
all youth out there. Just don't get caught.
I would say that land is power. Land has so much power. And for especially girls today, there may be a sense of powerlessness, that you don't have a lot of, control over, what you eat, the ways in which you move around in the community. But to become a grower of food, it just felt powerful for me. It felt like I reclaimed my own sense of authority, my own sense of importance, a sense of identity. And once you understand the power of the land, you understand the power of your connection to the land and community, because we're all a part of the land. And so it reinforces the community. It reinforces the identity that, yes, I am a woman in this world or male in this world, but I'm also a part of a larger community. And not just the community that we can see today, but a community that stretches generations, and a community that you're going to be involved in, influencing in the future. So to realize your power, to be a part of a strong past, and to be able to influence the future, I think that's a very powerful idea, and it's an idea that I would love for everyone to embrace.
So, Khadija, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Do you mind rephrasing?
The question is, look into this audience and you'll see some youth that want to farm. What advice would you give them?
I'm going to just say that I'm going to give this advice to anybody who wants to farm. Youth, older, whatever it is. Don't do it by yourself. This is a community work. It's communing with nature, communing with people. It's about food production. 2, do nothing without intention. Nothing. Like, everything you touch, everything you do is going to have an impact, whether you see it or not. So do nothing without intention. And 3, have fun. Also, land is power, but numbers are too. So get your, this is always joke, I say, get your cult together, get your commune, whatever it is, and get people working. I find that communal farming is much easier. We know that because of community gardens, urban farms, but we also seeing that in farming. So there are people who want to farm. I'm seeing that a lot. I wanted to farm. I don't own land right now, but I feel like through the community processes that I'm a part of, I'm in the process. So, I mean, I can't say all the tea, but I'll just say that there are old white farmers out there who kids don't want to farm. And if you have a cool project, you should talk to them. That's all I'm gonna say. Just talk to them. Just be like, wow, you got a lot of land. You're taking good care of it. Don't you want to continue doing that? Do you really want your 350 acres to be a suburb? I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay, old wise man. What advice are you going to give to the youth?
So I would have to piggyback on both of the things that they said and almost feel like I was being redundant. But what I will say is this. Most people believe that power is taken, not given. Most people believe that it is the I, not the me. And just based on both of these two insight, I would say that if you start to understand that Mother Nature gives you power, gives you the ability to work on the land, and that the land is a living organism that we should treat as such, then we get power. Just having land, that's not power. It's a little piece of power because land allows you to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do if you didn't have it. But if you're gonna plant something in it, you have to understand that you have to give up control. You have to give up, all of the things that most of us consider to be powerful, okay? And the reason for that is because a plant takes its time to get to fruit. And we are always in a rush. We go to the grocery store, get a tomato. It's not the same as waiting 85, 90 days to get a tomato. It's totally different when you think about the power of seasonality and growing things within season so that the soil can have itself a time to replenish itself. That is power. Knowing and understanding that it's a time for all things. And then lastly, I would say, thank you. Lastly, I would say on that community aspect, understand that farming is work. You do not wake up in the morning all of a sudden, I want to be a farmer. And the reason I say that is because I wear Carhartts and Ridge Cut, and I got some nice boots on that are Bloodstones. But understand that I didn't get any of those things until I was 12 years into farming. I didn't start off all well coiffed and all that other kind of stuff, looking all sexy. Like I still, seriously, like think about when you all think of a farmer right now, you do think of the old farmer with the hat twisted to the side and, you know, doing all that. But you also know that they got these sexy calendars of like farmers now, right? That's not the reality. Once you cut off the tip of your finger, which is right here, right? Once you get into that sugarcane field and that machete comes down real hard and you realize that it almost cut your boot. See, look. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden you sit back like, is this what we really want to do every day? And for those of you that are upstate and live up in this category, I'm from Georgia. It's been 90 plus degrees for the last 2 months. So y'all catching up with us, you know what I'm saying? So understand that farming is work. And also, you know, that whole Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. If we are to reclaim, not return, reclaim who and what we are, we have to understand it's work. We have to understand that once we get the power, we have to pass on the institutional knowledge, regardless of who and what we are. And then we cannot do it alone.
I think it's question and answer time. Okay, so I got questions. I gotta wear my glasses, because you know when you're farming, yeah, you need glasses. Okay, one question was, considering sustainability is our soil, considering sustainability, is our soil still producing the same quality of food that our ancestors enjoyed? Interesting question.
Can I start?
Yeah, start.
All right. Soil, if y'all didn't know, takes a long ass time to make, like millions of years. So like, in short, no, there's no way. However, the food that we are enjoying is different in other ways. The taste of it, the shape of it, the frequency, the growth, all those things have been altered by the development of our civilization. If the question is the soil the same? No, but there are ways, like we have been working to restore some of the soil. We have learned a lot in the last 200, 300, 400 years about the soil. And so there are efforts underway for conservation, for practices that return those nutrients back to the soil. It's never going to be the same again. It can't be. But we can continue to conserve and work on it and employ practices that don't take from it.
Okay, I have another question, which is really good. All right. Said with great love and from a place of spiritual curiosity, how do you reconcile owning land that was originally stolen from indigenous people? I'm going to answer that too.
Why don't you start?
I'm going to start because this is a question, again, you got to be very careful how people pit Black and indigenous and separate us. And this has happened because of the lawsuit that Black farmers have been trying to get in terms of getting land from the federal government. And so now they're putting indigenous people into the conversation as saying, well, you know, it's really not land for Black people, you know, what about indigenous people? First of all, folks, it's not about owning land, because we can't own land. We don't live long enough to own anything. So that sort of capitalistic extractive language that separates us into saying who owns anything, nature owns it, okay? What we can say is that as people of color together, we want the land so that we can be stewards of the land, not owning the land. And by saying that we're stewards of the land, we are taking care of the land so that it's in the hands for generation to generation, and not allow outsiders to put us in pigeonholes to separate us, pitting Black against indigenous when it comes to land. Because as we know, This country was built on the backs of indigenous and enslaved people. And our relationship to land is spiritual, it's caring, it's loving. And we want that land so that we can take care of it, so that we don't extract it, so that we don't exploit it, so that it's there in the hands for generations and generations to come. So that's all I got to say about it.
So thank you, Karen, because you're definitely saying all the things that I'm sure we were thinking on the panel. I just also, I think it's important that people know that this is a systemic tactic and that it's gonna continue, and that it has been a tactic for as long as we've existed in this capitalist structure, this culture. I think what you said is very key, and that our goal as a monolith, right? Our goal as a community, both indigenous, Black, really all of the communities that have been and continue to be adversely affected by a system designed to separate and divide us. The whole point of this work that we're doing, and this is why I say do nothing without intention, right? The whole point of this work is so that everyone gets to eat and that people get to commune with nature. So the idea of land ownership, stewardship, which is really what it is actually impactful to indigenous nations as well. All of it is meant so that all of us are sustained. And the idea that is separate is intentional and is meant to divide us.
All right, brother, come on. Talk that talk.
No, I'm trying not to.
It's the right audience, do it.
To cry. Just the right audience.
Just
to
the right
cry.
audience.
So for me, the Wale traveled up and down the coast of Georgia, South Carolina, and northern Florida. And they traveled seasonally. They didn't own anything. They just traveled as a traveling band using canoes and things like that. There are still oyster piles that are throughout the area that are just huge piles of oyster shells. And on our farm, we use a lot of oyster shells. And the reason for that is it sparks chitin in the soil that keeps down root knot nematodes. But just so everybody understands, all those words that I just used, like spark the calcium, chitin, root knot nematode, are new words. They're not the words that our ancestors would have used. They knew that there was a bug in the ground that was eating this thing, and we need to, oh wait, we put a shell there and it worked? Oh, put more shells there. We have been, I gotta use the story of my grandmother, my Nana, as the way to really get you to super sit in this. When I graduated from CASPAS, my sister and I ordered 100 fruit trees. 100 fruit trees. So if anybody knows the cost of just one fruit tree, think of the highest price one, divide it in half, and multiply that by 100. Just so you, I heard somebody say, wow, so you just did the number. I planted my sister and I planted 100 fruit trees. Right size hole, right amount of compost, everything. And we walk our Nana out to see this amazing fruit orchard, because a person does not plant a fruit tree for themselves, but for their children's children's children, which is 3 generations, children's children's children, 6 generations. My Nana goes out with her little wood cane that's actually a broomstick that she put inside a fire so that the tip would get tight. Walking out there and goes, what's that? I said, oh, Nana, that's a pomegranate. Mm-hmm. Oh, what's that? Oh, it's a persimmon. Oh, what's that? We did this for 100 trees. She literally walked past almost every one of them. We got to the fig tree. She goes, what is that? And I said, it's a fig tree. And she goes, let me know when that grows. So she passes at least 90 trees before she says, let me know when that grows. We lost 100 trees and we lost 99 trees and 1 fig tree made it. 1. And during that time frame, my Nana says, hey, come here, I need to talk to you about what you learned when you went off to school. And I said, okay, now the tree's still alive at this point. She then does this. So you went to school for organics. What does that have to do with farming? What does organics have to do with farming? So I get into this thing of explaining organics and going down this thing, and you do all this. And she looked me dead in my face and said, Negro, you went to school with these white folks to learn what you already know. You could have gave me that $6,000. When I say we sit at them feet of them elders and that's where we should stay until we are no longer on this earth, I learned at that moment, not only did I not know what I didn't know, but that I had not taken the time to have a conversation on the land that my Nana grew up on to say, what's gonna grow here? What do you think would be the best? It's the same as me sitting at Corinne Bailey's feet and her going, you just heel toe. Now, I went to school to learn something that was already DNA, innate, part of me. Do you know how much money I have spent going to school because I felt I needed a bachelor's degree in culinary arts when I already knew how to make puff pastry dough when I was a kid? Do you understand that y'all brought us here for a reason and then extrapolated from us all of these reasons that you brought us here? Rice, sugarcane, how to bake, how to cook, how to work over hearth ovens and stuff. Y'all didn't bring uneducated people to the United States, and now you're gonna treat me like I'm uneducated? That ain't gonna work.
It's not just the treatment, right? They're regurgitating.
Treatment. Yes.
They've taken from us.
Yes.
And now they're saying, let me teach you your culture.
Let me teach you your culture.
Yeah.
Right. So when that thing that you said about the indigenous, that is the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. They have extrapolated all of this stuff. Anybody know how much fish emulsion costs? Anybody? It's $30 a gallon. But we read in the textbooks that the pilgrims learned from the indigenous people to plant an ear of corn with a fish head. So we talk about something that was hundreds upon almost 1,000 years old. We now selling fish emulsion for $30. Capitalism has taken over this thing, and I'm glad you brought this up, agribusiness instead of agriculture. That's what's happened.
Can you talk a little bit, first of all, let's get a round of applause. And Barbara, where are you? I got time? Because, you know, we can go all day. Barbara, where are you? Where are you? Do I have time? Okay. All right, perfect. Okay. So, yeah, I want to get, I'm coming right to you because that's what your film is all about. So, come on, bring it home.
I was going to add that everybody
Your mic.
Mic up.
Your mic.
Mic up.
Oh, the divide and conquer. That is exactly how they do it. All black folks want to do the same thing indigenous people want to do is have agriculture. Mm-hmm. Our culture is in that land. Our rituals are in that land. We go to the woods to pray. Mm-hmm. We are able to maintain a sense of who we are and hand it off to generations because we can do what we can do on the land. And we are stewards. One of the things that I loved when I started talking to these black farmers about how they would plant by the signs of the moon. They would never overgraze. It was the first thing, and we use this term today, regenerative agriculture. Mm-hmm. That is such an old practice. Maybe they didn't have the term, but they always took care of the soil. Just like our First Nations people, we are the same. So when they start asking about, well, what about this land ownership? Native Americans I don't know if they're First Nations people here we don't try to own the land. Of course, there's not even a concept of that. It's the land take care of us, we take care of the land. It helps us to survive to the next generation, and the land is our family.
Yeah.
We are the family of the land. And so definitely just shut that conversation down when it comes for you.
Yeah, of course. us.
I
What's
was
the conversation? Let's talk.
It is a conversation. Sorry, I ask for permission and consent a lot. It's a practice of mine so that I'm better at it. So I asked Karen if I may add to that. And I was just thinking, like, systemically, capitalism is designed so that no matter how you try to make changes in it, it steers you back to money. So the idea, right? How do we get Black people to own land? What they're saying is, here's an opportunity under capitalism to make money. And I don't want you to have that, so I'm gonna make sure it looks bad. Because I need to make sure that it's illustrated that Black people want this land as an opportunity for entrepreneurship. It's about lifting the Black community, right? Which is all based in capitalism. Because the only way you can lift a community is if you have jobs and make money and like keep the machine oiled and running. That is a gag. That's the gag. The gag is you don't need money for any of that stuff. You need culture, you need community. To eat, to drink water, to breathe clean air, that is a right. We cannot exist without those things. And you know what else? We cannot exist without pleasure. Our bodies are built for it. That's why farming feels so good.
There's a lot of questions. I'm trying to look and trying to condense them. But I just want to ask my own question if I can do that. It's like, so we talked about spirituality, we talked about our connection to community. If I could say this, tell me about what would your legacy be? What is it that you want to leave behind that people, or say something about yourself that people don't really know about you? So I know that's a hard and difficult question. So if you look back, you're in the future, right? And you're looking back, what is it that you want to be not known for, but you accomplish and be proud of in the work that you're doing? So let's start with you. Who's going to talk first?
I'll get it over with.
Go.
I personally want the land that my family has stewarded since 1874 to become one of the largest wellness centers for people from the African diaspora to come to reset themselves by seeing what can be done as an instrument to move us along. My daughter is a nurse practitioner. She's already willing to give 1 week a month back up on the farm so that we can start doing more community health things to help our community, so they can see the food, know that the carrot is good, know that we grow ginger and turmeric, understand what it takes to be able to have the inflammatory decrease by using the turmeric with fat and capsicum within the process. And so that is one of the things that I want, and my sister wants, and my wife wants our legacy to be, and that our children currently understand it, but not feel like they have to be forced to do it. And also looking at it from a science, technology, reading, engineering, arts, and math, all those things make farming. All those things make cooking. All those things are so interconnected that we forget that we have moved technologically into robots or tractors that can go out with GPS systems. I want our children to understand that they don't necessarily have to toil the soil, but they can be part of agriculture by designing technological advancements. And so I want to give our people that chance in an environment where wellness is the beginning and then push on to stream.
I'll go. I would like to be remembered as a seed of generational appreciation of the land. Like that I was one part of this community that flowered and helped to produce seeds for the next generation, and that those will go on and take care of each other and take care of the land. So I want to be a seed for change and a seed for love. And also what people don't know is that I DJ a little bit.
Hey.
Little DJ.
Not a little bit,
Just a
y'all.
little
She
bit, just a
can
little bit
DJ. Yes.
I find lately that I'm incredibly disinterested from being a public figure, a remembered face, any of those things. My goal in this work is to live a happy life, to grow and eat the food that I grow and eat, to share that with other people. I am deeply invested in community building and development, connecting New York City folks, Bronx in particular, to land access and food access, but again, not as this face, this entity that I think often feels untouchable. I can speak from my own personal experience, and coming on this panel today, I was very nervous. I was like, oh, I'm not as accomplished, I'm not as, I'm not as mature, I'm not all these things. And I realized that ultimately what I want is for people to see me and go, oh, I could do that. I could do that. Because it's true. That's literally what it's about. I think, like, while this is important and I appreciate being up here and these kind of conversations are important, I think what you said when you first came on, which is the most important part, like you were in the car with people, talking, engaging, having conversation. And where we are now all started with that. Like, I want to learn something. I want to meet someone. I want to do something. So, like, when people ask, like, oh, like, how do I get started? Like, just get started. Go to a garden, meet somebody, talk. You don't know where you're going to be. I was just growing food because that's what my family did. And now I'm farming because it feels good and because I have these opportunities laid out for me by folks on the panel. So, like, my goal is not to be another face on the panel. I'm happy to be on that. I love talking. But I really just want, like, people to feel like they can do it, because we can, and we are.
So as we are coming to a close, one of the questions, people want to reach out to you. They want to get to know you. They want to visit your farm. So I'll start with you, Dr. Gail Myers. How can folks reach out to you? Where are you? How can they find you? Mike?
Sorry about that. I co-founded an organization. It's in California called Farms to Grow. So we're on the website, farmstogrow.com. And although we started in California, our work is around the country, and we've actually helped communities in Liberia and Haiti as well write proposals for getting farms. But I'm doing this film called Rhythms of the Land. And stay tuned, because this film will hopefully spark a whole new conversation in this country about land loss, about reparations, reclamation, rematriation. And so I will hopefully be in a city near you, but basically you can look us up at farmstogrow.com. We have a wonderful website that displays all of the work that we're doing, and it's very exciting. We were talking about, it's a season change, it's a sea change. We're seeing more, one of the things that we're finding to be true in California is many of the children that have farmers today didn't want to go to farm. We were talking about that. But as the children see the success of their families and their fathers and mothers farming, they are looking at succeeding them. So we're looking to reinvigorate the next generation. That is so critical. Karen mentioned that the average age of a Black farmer is in the 60s. And so unless we put new farmers in the pipeline with the same kind of love and commitment to stewardship, we won't continue to have this legacy. So I just, really want us to support each other's farms efforts and all the work that the panelists are doing and other people in the community to make sure that we have food, that we can feed each other, and that we understand the ancestors' connection. That's really key.
So Matthew, how can people find you?
So I've already talked a lot about myself. So what I'd like everyone to do is either take out their smartphone or a piece of paper and a pen because one of the things in the very first conversation was, where are the Black farmers? And so I'd like to give you a few areas or places you can go to find Black farmers. You'll find me in some of them, and that's the way you can get me. So I'll start off with, well, Gail already said her organization. I will then move to SAAFON, SAAFON, which stands for the Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network. There's 126 Black farmers that are on that. I believe it's .org. SAAFON, SAAFON. The next one would be the Black Farmers Index. The next one would be, and I would be remiss to bring this up, is the Farmer Veterans Coalition. It's not a Black per se, but if you want to connect with Black veterans, because most of our veterans come from rural communities, a lot of our Black veterans are from rural communities. The reason I'm putting that out there is because I have continuously heard, not here per se, but through all my travels, bugs.
I'll get to that.
Yes. We have organizations that are there. So whenever I hear someone say, where are the Black farmers? Why haven't you looked at GU, Google University? Why have you not typed in Black farmers in your state or your location? I don't understand why we believe that the information is going to automatically come to us. We have to look for it. It's right around the corner, right? And so that's why I want to give up those organizations and give a hand to these two women that have worked tirelessly to get their organizations off the ground, worked tirelessly to show where Black farmers are, and that you don't have to have anything but a bucket, right, to grow. You do not need thousands of acres. And for those that really want land, leave the city. There is no land that you're gonna get in the city. You gotta go somewhere that has some land. We have millions of acres of land that are in the state of Georgia that are just sitting there. Like you said, white farmers that have had it, they tired of paying the taxes, they ain't working on it, so why not give them a project? So there is land. And if you want to get out and get land, that's L-A-N-D, you got to go to the country, C-O-U-N-T-R-Y, to get it.
All right, Khadija.
So my project's pretty new. We don't have a website yet. We have an Instagram. I'm gonna say it a couple times. It's iridescent.earth.collective on Insta. Also, we are at the James Baldwin Outdoor Learning Center Market right now. My colleagues are posted up at our first stand. Please go check it out if you like. DM us on Instagram. We answer those pretty quickly. If you have questions, if you want to come visit our host farm, Star Route Farm in the Catskills, and if you want to ask us any questions, we're totally open. The whole point of this group is so that we can talk to people and get people growing food. So, Iridescent Earth Collective.
And I'm going to put in the plug for bugs.
Yeah.
Black urban growers. We were the first, I guess, community of folks bringing both Black, urban, and rural farmers together. We had the first conference back in 2010. Started here in New York City. We had over 500 people attending for the first time, seeing people that look like them, farmers that look like them, authors that look like them, chefs that look like them. And so we're having it this year in Atlanta, Georgia, October 14th, 15th, and 16th. If you belong to an organization, make sure they send you there and pay for it, for you to come. I want to take this time, first of all, big up to our panelists. Please give them a round of applause. They've been absolutely excellent. I also want to take this opportunity because I'm on the board of the New York Botanical Gardens. And I just want to say that these last 2 days, I don't want to get emotional, have been really, really awe-inspiring to see this garden embrace the diasporas of people of color, of bringing joy and happiness and love, and sometimes an institution that sometimes seems so stagnant and so distant. And I want to thank Jennifer because, we had a conversation when we first met, a conversation that I love this garden, but sometimes what's missing is that community aspect. And what I saw yesterday was so much love and joy and color. And I want it to happen all the time. And I hope that they will continue to have this Juneteenth celebration so that it brings what we are as a people, the diversity and inclusion that is so important, that makes us human. And so I want to thank you, Jennifer. I want to thank the New York Botanical Gardens. It was risky, but it paid off. It was risky to have hard conversations. To have hard conversations, to make people feel uncomfortable, to be comfortable. Right now, we're in a state where there's so much division. People are afraid, and when they're afraid, they bring out lies to try to divide us. But when we celebrate, that's why we farm, because when we farm and we celebrate who we are as a human people with different colors and different ethnicity, this is what makes the world so, so much better. So again, I want to give a thanks to Barbara Corcoran, Ursula Chance, all these people that made it possible. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I guess Jennifer is going to do some closing remarks.
Listening to this set of amazing speakers today, the world needs a lot of repair. And I think these speakers today have showed us how that gets done in a very powerful way. And we're very grateful to you. So thank you. Thank you to everybody who spoke today. And I want to mention the community garden, Takwa, that you referenced. It's featured as part of the Oral Histories Project. So if you want to learn more about that space, you can out in the lobby. I also want to thank the staff. There are many people who helped to make this possible today. You see them all around you. So thank you all for being here and making this happen. And I want to thank you, the audience, for coming today. There is a book signing happening. Matthew and Natalie are signing books in the lobby. Get them while you can. This was recorded. We will be sharing it. Please share it with the people you know. And get out into the garden. It is a beautiful day, and there's much to see, including the wonderful new African-American garden that we opened last night. And Matthew will be doing a food demonstration at the Edible Academy at 3:30, so don't miss that. So please enjoy. Thank you for being here. We're so grateful.